Within the world of real estate, there are many terms that are commonly used that are not always understood in their entirety. So the terms deposit and down payment, for example, are often confused, used interchangeably, or just not really defined properly. So today I am going to talk about these terms, deposit and down payment. I'm going to talk about the difference between them and how they are connected. I'm also going to be talking about the instances in which a buyer can actually lose their deposit, which is why it is so important to understand these terms if you are looking at buying real estate. So let's start out by defining these two terms just to get some clarity. So a deposit is a sum of money put forward by the buyer as a pledge for a contract. So basically it is security for the seller. So it's really important for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's going to show the seller how serious you are. So for example, if there are two buyers that are competing for the same property, buyer A submits an offer with a deposit of $500, while buyer B submits an offer with a deposit of $5,000, which buyer do you think is going to seem like they're more serious to the seller? Obviously, it's going to be the buyer who submits an offer with a $5,000 deposit. Another reason why a deposit is so important is because it limits the possibility of the deal falling apart once conditions have been removed. So if a deposit is between $5,000 to $10,000, the chances of the buyer actually walking away from the deal is very unlikely unless they have no other choice. So for a seller, the higher the deposit, the better. Now let's move on to the definition for a down payment. So a down payment is a sum of money that is paid in order to be eligible for financing. So whoever you decide to go through for financing, whoever your lender is, so whether that's going to be a bank or a mortgage broker, they're going to discuss their specific requirements for a down payment. So this percentage is going to depend on a few things. For example, whether or not this is going to be a primary residence versus a rental property. So one thing to note about how the deposit and the down payment are connected is that the deposit actually goes towards your down payment. So the deposit is not above that amount, it just goes towards that sum. So if it's 5% down payment and you put down $5,000 for your deposit, that $5,000 would then go in to that 5%. Now I'm going to discuss some differences between deposits and down payments. So number one, deposits do not have to be a certain percentage while down payments do. So the deposit is typically decided by the buyer. They can pick an amount that they want to put down for a deposit. Mind you, the seller has to agree to this amount. So in some cases, the buyer may choose a deposit and then the seller may counter offer asking for that amount to be increased. But the bottom line is that they just must agree in writing. The down payment is going to be a minimum of 5%. So again, we kind of talked about this earlier, but you would have to discuss with your lender what their specific requirements are for your situation. So if you are wanting to put 5%, that would be the minimum. If you want to avoid paying mortgage insurance, then you'd have to put a minimum of 20%. So this just means that there's not going to be a third party that's going to be insuring your mortgage. All right, number two, deposits are due right away while down payments are not due until completion. So a deposit can be due when the offer's wrote, it can be due when the offer is accepted or at another specified time on the contract. So it kind of depends on how it is wrote, and the deposit can also be made in installments. So I've had offers where it's written that the deposit, say $2,000, is going to be due upon acceptance, and then an additional $3,000 will be provided by the buyer once the conditions are removed, making the total deposit amount $5,000. So it kind of just depends on how the contract is wrote. The down payment, on the other hand, is going to be due basically just prior to the possession day. It's going to be requested that you provide that amount. Number 3, the deposit is handled by your realtor, while the down payment is handled by your lender. So the deposit, when you go to write the offer, this is all going to be through your realtor, and the deposit is going to be held in trust at the real estate brokerage. And when the deal actually closes, then the lawyer will request the funds from the real estate brokerage and they can forward them over. The down payment, on the other hand, is going to be handled, discussed and handled by the lender, but the money will actually be provided directly to the lawyer. So as promised, I'm going to discuss what happens to the deposit when a deal falls through, and in what instance the buyer can potentially lose their deposit. So there are a few different things that can happen, but what it really boils down to is when the deal falls apart. So when an offer is wrote, most offers have conditions that are attached to the offer, and these conditions have a deadline. So typically it would be a 2-week time frame to complete the conditions. So if you were to get a week in, say, and the deal fell apart, they were not able to remove the conditions, then that means that the deposit would actually go back to the buyer because they were allowed that time frame to satisfy their conditions, and for some reason they were not able to. If the deal fell through after conditions were removed in writing, so this means that the property is technically sold, then that means that the deposit money would actually be forwarded to the seller. So this is to compensate the seller for having their property taken off the market and it was not being advertised to the buying market for a period of time. So that's compensation for them and security, as we had discussed in the beginning. So that concludes today's video. I hope that you guys understand the difference between a deposit and a down payment. This information will really help you to submit an offer with confidence. Leave a comment below a real estate term that you would like explained. I would be more than happy to do that. Thanks for tuning in, you guys. Have a great week.